After a total of 12 years as Secretary of State, Agnes Baggett is stepping down. The Democrats and Republicans both have nominated candidates for the general election to fill that spot. A longtime Republican Party official, Peggy Noel, has received her party's nomination. A native of Birmingham, Mrs. Noel was a Ronald Reagan delegate to the Republican National Convention in 1976. Casting herself in the role of Secretary of State, Mrs. Noel talks of making the office a model for other departments to follow. She believes that some of the election procedures could be somewhat modified.
What I say we need to do is to see that the present voting machines we have are properly serviced and tested before Election Day. And I understand that in the 12 counties who do not have voting machines now, who still use paper ballots, that they have been ordered. I also think that the people who are running these machines on Election Day should be properly and thoroughly trained so that this sort of situation won't happen again. It's just a matter of being on top of a situation and seeing that these simple things are properly done.
Peggy Noel is in favor of limits on campaign spending, but she believes the state legislature should impose those limits. Meanwhile, Alabama Democrats have also nominated a Birmingham citizen, Don Siegelman, as its candidate for Secretary of State. Siegelman is no newcomer to the Democratic Party. He has served as the party's executive director and general counsel. Siegelman refers to his ideas about the office as cleansing the soul of Alabama politics.
Well, the main thing that I want to accomplish is to push through some changes in our election laws, and I think that I'm highly qualified to do that. I think that my background and my experience as executive director and general counsel for the state Democratic Party, and having served as secretary and coordinator of a state election law reform commission, really puts me in a unique position to push through some changes in our election laws. And I think that we need those because, in my judgment, virtually every problem that we face, whether it's high taxes or whether it's high utility bills or the wasted tax dollars in Montgomery or Washington, or the inefficiency or unresponsiveness of government, or the seemingly endless bureaucracy, in some way or another relates to who we elect. And I think that those problems can be solved by the election of good and decent and honest people to public office. And I think to a certain extent the election laws serve as barriers to attracting good people into public office.
Siegelman has plans for a voluntary election commission to look at the present election laws and suggest changes to the Alabama legislature. He says through some reforms, the door of politics can be opened to those who have been shut out for a long, long time. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Why hasn't the GOP sent in any of its big guns into the state of Alabama and other typical southern states, except in perhaps selected races like the Jim Martin Senate race?
Well, I don't know that I have the answer. Much depends, if somebody makes the request, then I think we go to work and try to find whatever speaker they might want. So whether or not the request is made, I'm not certain. I know I'm here for Jim Martin. I'm not a big gun, but I'm a big, long-time friend of Jim Martin, so I'm happy to be here for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. What impact would a Republican senator from Alabama have on the GOP and your party's strategy in the predominantly Democratic South?
Well, I think it would have a great impact. First of all, as I look at Jim Martin, for example, I look at a conservative voice in the Senate of the United States, and certainly we need that in both parties. We don't have a choice, I understand, on the Democratic side, so Jim Martin would fill that bill without any question. Secondly, I think there's a need for a strong two-party system. And if we can pick up seats in the South or the North or wherever, we're going to be more competitive. And we're going to be more competitive, we're going to have better legislation. Plus, I think there would be a recognition almost immediately that the South is a force to be reckoned with as far as Republicans are concerned. And of course, I see it as a big plus from a party standpoint, and a big plus all the way around.
This would be more or less breaking the ice in the South.
Right. We had the ice broken, along came Watergate, and it all froze over again. Mm-hmm. And a lot of good people lost races because of Watergate. This would start it again.
Mm-hmm. Looking back to 1964, do you think that perhaps could have been the beginning in the South?
It could have been the beginning. In fact, it did give us a little start in Alabama, and with 5 Republican congressmen coming to Congress. But it was a small beachhead that stayed. We still have 3. We have Bill Dickinson, of course, in this area. But we can do better. We need to do better. After all, we want to be an all-American party, and that means every state in the Union.
After watching President Carter's rise and fall in the polls, what does this tell the Republicans about the type of candidate that your party must field in the 1980 presidential campaign?
Well, I think, it's my own view, that he has to be someone with experience, first of all. Someone who understands the problems in Alabama or Kansas or New York City. I don't think we're looking for a regional candidate. Of course, I'm not trying to describe anyone in particular, but I think also someone with a moderate to conservative philosophy, not someone on the far right or someone on the far left, probably a centrist to conservative type candidate, concerned about taxes and inflation and spending, and willing to stand up and, if necessary, veto legislation in an effort to persuade the Congress it's necessary.
Would you be such a candidate?
Well, you know, I probably described how I feel, but and my experience, I think I might be described by some as fitting that particular description.
Mm-hmm. Looking back to 1976, if you and Gerald Ford had it to do all over again, and I'm sure you've had this question asked many times, where would you change your strategy and what would you do differently?
Well, it's hard to know because we were 35 points behind, ended up losing by 1.5 points. Our post-election survey showed that the second debate was costly in many areas when the statement about Poland was made. On the other hand, the Friday before the Tuesday's election in November, 7 of the 10 leading economic indicators were down. Also, post-election surveys showed that 3 out of 10 of the undecided voted against Ford because of the pardon. And so I'm not certain what you would have changed. We must have done something right to pick up 32 points or 33 points, 33 and a half. We might have spent more time in Ohio, for example. We might have gone to Hawaii. We almost carried Hawaii with neither the president or myself visiting there. Not that one visit makes that much difference, but there was a feeling in some areas that, well, if they don't come, they don't care. Mm-hmm. Those 2 states, of course, would have made a difference.
President Carter has called the recently concluded congressional session a success. How would you evaluate that Congress?
Well, I think it's customary for any president to call his Congress a success. I think there are areas of success, but I don't think it's a total success. I don't see any vast new areas that we've gotten into. We passed a tax bill, certainly not a tax cut, but it has some good features in it. The really only new legislation, maybe civil service reform, but again, not a massive piece of legislation. And maybe that's good. Maybe we ought to slow down. We don't need to pass bills to be a good Congress. I would give us about a C in the Congress.
What particular legislation did you see that passed by the board, so to speak, that was not acted on, that perhaps you would like to have seen acted on?
I think where we failed is in the energy field. You know, we passed what we call an energy bill, but it doesn't add to the production. It doesn't do much to develop alternate sources of supply. And I think this is where we really failed the American people. Now, I assume next year the president will have ideas and we will have ideas. I think in the area of whether it's welfare reform or health care, there are 2 other areas that must be dealt with. Hospital costs. There are a number of areas that we just didn't come to grips with. We had very close divisions. We couldn't pass anything.
Sir, what will the impact be of Mr. Warnke's resignation?
Well, the impact of Mr. Warnke's resignation on the SALT II negotiations should be rather small. He left yesterday with Secretary Vance to go to Moscow for the next round of the SALT II talks. We still hope that we can reach agreement in principle this weekend, Sunday and Monday are the meetings, on the remaining issues. So he will be there and a full active participant in the next round of SALT.
Does the timing of this strike anyone unusual, that he would participate in the talks and then leave before they appear for Senate ratification?
No, when President Carter in early of 1977 asked Mr. Warnke to take over the job of Director of the Arms Control Agency and Chief SALT Negotiator, Mr. Warnke indicated at that time that for personal reasons he could not stay for a full term. President Carter prevailed on him to stay through the completion of the SALT II negotiations, and our expectation is that he will be with us through the completion of those negotiations.
What about the announcement yesterday that some components of the neutron bomb will be manufactured, but a bomb will not be assembled? What impact will this have on the talks?
It should have no impact on the SALT negotiations. First of all, President Carter has still not made a final decision on whether or not to deploy the neutron or enhanced radiation warhead. What he announced yesterday was that we are going to go ahead and develop and produce some of the components which can modernize the Lance missile and the 8-inch howitzer shell, both of which are already deployed in Europe, and to develop and produce some of the components that would be needed to make a neutron weapon, but not all of those components. The final decision on a neutron weapon has yet to be made. Secondly, even if one had been made, it should have little or no effect on the SALT talks, because the neutron weapon is designed for tactical use in Central Europe. It is not a strategic system, one that is used directly by the United States against the Soviet Union, and therefore it really doesn't come under the purview of SALT.
But it would be a debating point during discussions, would it not?
It has been raised in the public and in the Senate in the past, and I would assume that it would be so in the future. But it really relates much more to the balance of conventional forces and theater nuclear forces in Europe than it does to the strategic forces, which really are the subject of SALT.
One of the discussions that's going on in the state of Alabama at the moment involves a congressional race. We have 2 senatorial seats open. And in that discussion, there has been a great deal of political rhetoric, and some, I suspect, with and some without substance. One of the allegations made about the SALT talks involves the leaving open of American cities, leaving vulnerable. By agreement, certain cities would not be protected from counterattack or attack. Is there anything like that that you can discuss?
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to discuss the Senate races in your state, but as far as SALT dealing with leaving certain American cities open to attack, as I understand the question, civil defense measures as such, either by the U.S. or the Soviet Union, are not part of the SALT negotiations. And our civil defense decisions, and I would assume Soviet civil defense decisions, are made independently of what's talked about in SALT. SALT has little or nothing to do with the civil defense programs of either side.
Are you optimistic we will come away with something that will be acceptable to the Senate?
I'm hopeful that we will. I think that if we get a treaty that is along the lines that we're negotiating now, I think it'll be a sound treaty. It'll provide for equal forces for both sides. It'll force the Soviets to reduce by some 300 systems that they already have deployed. It will bring the 2 sides into a position of stability. It will make predicting about the future a lot easier, and I would hope that the members of the Senate would see it as a sound agreement.
The reason I raise that question is a statement that was made in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago that the President was examining the possibility that the final agreement would not be sent to the Senate for ratification as a treaty. If that were the case, what would happen with the negotiations and with the document that's prepared?
Well, in simplest terms, there are 2 options. One would be to send the agreement to the Senate as a treaty, which, as you know, would require a 2/3 vote by that body. The other alternative would be to submit it to the Congress as a whole as an executive agreement, which would require a simple majority in both houses. In either case, it's clear and it's constitutional that the Congress, either through one house or 2, would have an opportunity to review in considerable detail this agreement.
There are about 550 Montgomery School Crossing junior officers who take it on themselves to protect their fellow students at intersections near Montgomery area schools. They buy their own uniforms and wear them every day they go to work directing traffic. Major E.G. Osgood, Montgomery Police Department Youth AIDS Division Commander, says Montgomery youths have been carrying out that responsibility for over 30 years.
1948, retired Chief George Owens felt that the city needed some method or mode of getting boys and girls back and forth to school as safely as possible. So he picked up some information from different places over the country and put together the start of our junior traffic police safety patrol as it is today.
They love their jobs. It's challenge, it's demanding, responsible, and rewarding.
Well, their biggest responsibilities is to see that the children cross the street safely in the morning and in the afternoon. And they must learn to stand there at attention and to operate the flags in such a manner where the children will be safe.
And that responsibility they carry out well.
We are now in our 30th year without a child ever being seriously injured in a school zone. And we know of no other city around anywhere that has this type of record.
Corporal Burson is the man responsible for organizing and conducting the training programs that prepare these kids for their jobs at the Montgomery area schools.
Okay, they work in the mornings and afternoon, of course. They have to get up earlier than most school kids. And then they're the last ones to go home from school in the afternoon. And they work for 1 week. They wear their complete uniform for a week, every day, and then they're off for a week. So we have 2 different shifts that rotate 1 week.
In addition to their stretched out hours, they meet regularly to drill and polish up on their techniques and talk about problem areas. Despite the complexity of it all, they have to work hard to stay in the program. As junior school crossing patrol officers, they become symbols of their exemplary students. They set a standard.
We look, and the school looks, at boys and girls that have a high scholastic rating and a very good disciplinary record. They're basically pretty solid students. And it's quite a, shall I use the term, a competitive thing among them. They work hard at this. We had one little girl at one of the schools last year. She was a lieutenant, and she worked every day that the school was in operation that year. And generally they work off 1 week and work the next week. But she worked every day.
They receive no money for their jobs and get no school credit for the training or the time put in before and after school. All they get is the recognition of a job well done and the satisfaction of knowing that they are the few who are school crossing patrol members. 4th graders in their last 6 weeks in school can apply to become patrol members. Then they go through a training program where they learn to handle the flags, learn situations, and become patrol members. The Montgomery Police Department funds just enough to pay for an annual trip for those who've worked the entire year.
We send our 5th grade boys and girls to Camp Rotary, which is a YMCA camp up on Lake Jordan, for a week. They spend a week up there. The 6th grade boys and girls has a week's or 4 days vacation, so to speak, in the Great Smoky Mountains. And the city picks up the tab for this, which amounts to about $18,000.
To the patrol members, the unsung heroes of the program are the school crossing officers, the 70 women throughout Montgomery who train the kids and monitor their work every day. It's to these women that these kids pledge their allegiance. Each year, the Montgomery Lions Club awards trophies to the Montgomery area school's best patrol. The police department recognizes the best girl patrol member and the best boy patrol member through certificates presented by Mayor Emery Fulmer, and each school has its own set of ceremonies recognizing the hardworking youths. I'm Chris Grimshaw for Alabama Illustrated.
Bob James drew applause from city officials from throughout the state when he repeated his commitment to support home rule. James told the Alabama League of Municipalities that local matters should be left to local governments.
Home rule has got to protect certain entities and corporations within the county body politic, and we've got to be very careful. But what we're trying to accomplish, again, and to repeat it because it's worth repeating, is to keep your governor and your state legislature for getting involved in matters that are local in nature, including your budgets, your taxes, your expenses, your courthouse, your city halls, and I could go all the way down the list.
James said passage of the $52 billion Federal Transportation Act will help Alabama finish road programs. But again, he said, cities need to supply input in such matters. James, who faces a challenge in his bid for the governorship from Republican Guy Hunt, said if elected he will need a few months to give local governments answers to questions put before his administration. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Percentage of the people of
Close the fiscal year. We did receive some funds in September, but they're reflected as deferred income and will be shown in next month's financial statement. In the expense section,
if we have a 5% proration, that we'll have to cut nearly half of our non-instructional or non-personnel area.
What are those?
Well, buying new school buses, buying batteries, tires, all the parts that go to maintain a fleet of 200 school buses, maintenance of school buildings themselves, maintenance of bathrooms, pipelines, painting, roofs, all of the other things that go to make up what I call housekeeping chores. Our electrical and gas bills are tremendous, run around $750,000 a year, and we will have to try to conserve on those in every way possible.
Mayor, happy to do this.
It's usually water system, it's usually Alabama, Mayor.
okay, right up this way.
Giving the people water out in the rural areas.
Alabama Senate District 27 consists of a major portion of the city of Montgomery. Within the Senate district are 3 House districts, numbers 79, 80, and 81. The incumbent Senator Fred Jones decided not to seek re-election. In his place on the Democratic ticket is State Representative Bishop Barron. Challenging Barron is Herbert Morton, a Republican. The Democratic contender, Bishop Barron, is a 54-year-old attorney and certified public accountant. He began his term in the legislature in 1973, filling the unexpired time of the late Representative Jim Strait. In 1974, Barron was elected for a full 4-year term as representative from the 79th District. Representative Barron has some definite ideas about what will cure the ills of the state government. Those ills, he says, are mostly economic.
I think the major issue that's going to affect the next legislature is, of course, that of funding. That is, funding the activities of state government for the next 4 years. I think the top priority in that issue is that of economy in government and more and better accountability in the spending of the tax dollar. I think with economies effected and with better accountability, that the same services can be provided within the same tax structure that we now have.
Barron says there are conditions under which he would be in favor of diverting funds from the Special Education Trust Fund.
I will have no hesitation whatsoever to divert if the only alternative I have is to increase tax or put on a tax. I will not, under any circumstance, vote for a new tax or vote to increase a tax. I have not in the 6 years I've been in the legislature, and I will not in the future.
Candidate Barron is not in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment, and he believes the state constitution should be rewritten, but slowly and carefully. Facing Barron is Republican Herbert Morton. Morton is no newcomer to politics. He was a member of the Montgomery County Commission between 1964 and 1968. In 1976, he was a delegate to the Republican National Convention in Kansas City. Morton is 68 years old and a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force. He's a professional engineer and is self-employed as a manufacturer's agent dealing in building and construction materials. Like Democrat Barron, Morton is concerned about a new constitution, but unlike his opponent, he wants the new governor to call a constitutional convention to rewrite the entire document. Morton is also concerned about the state from an economic view, saying that inflation and taxes are 2 major problems to be dealt with.
Proposition 13 in California is the only way to control political spending. You have to cut it off at the political level. The career politician can't do it. He uses it to buy votes to re-elect himself. So you have to start with a revolt of the people to stop wasteful spending, of which I have given you an example. This does not mean that the lower rating people in the state are part of this. These are the political favorites at the top, and there are hundreds of them throughout the state.
Morton also believes that an elected official should serve only one term and go home to live by the laws passed during his or her time in office. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Slaughtering in the area there, 4200 Amherst Drive, 4 carloads of them. Order on them.
The purpose of the car wash today is to help raise money to better equip the fire department, which we have. At the present time, we are running behind on funds, which is badly needed to buy hoses, adapter for fire plugs, and also to maintain and keep up the equipment that we have. Our biggest responsibility in our community is trying to protect the community from fires due to the fact that we are located at least 8 to 10 miles from Montgomery. And of course, the city of Montgomery is giving us a helping hand, but the big problem we have, the time involved for a fire truck to come from the city to the country, the amount of time that is lost, the fire can get out of hand, and our responsibility down here is to try to control the fire. Now, within the last 28 days, I would say, we had close to 30 to 32 fires in this area. Most of this is caused by the dry weather, no rain, or some of it is caused by just carelessness on people's part, or throwing cigarettes out of a car, or things of this nature. Today, we are trying to raise money to come up with somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 foot of fire hose, which is badly needed to accommodate us in fighting the fires and being more responsible to the community.
to withdraw their military government very expeditiously. And I think the settlements issue still remains open, but it's subject to a negotiation.
It is the physician who recommends hospitalization for the patient, selects the hospital, and determines the length of the hospital stay. The physician also recommends surgery, too often unnecessary. The doctors decide what tests, x-rays, and drugs the patient requires. Again, too often ordering more than are necessary. Just about the only decision the patient makes is whether or not to see a doctor in the first instance. In no other industry does the supplier have such absolute control over demand.
The Senate proposal, like the one already passed by the House, would give the states an extra 39 months to act. A House subcommittee opens public hearings today on the alleged corruption within the General Services Administration. GSA Director Jay Solomon will be among the first to testify. He's already stated that current allegations against the GSA are just the tip of the iceberg. Geological experts are keeping a very close watch on Laguna Beach, California. That community hit by a landslide yesterday. About 24 homes destroyed, but no one seriously hurt. The experts still do not know what caused the mudslide that created a 40-foot deep crevasse a half-mile long. It's 26 minutes before the hour, and Bob Ryan has weather when we return.
Here's a travel tip for today from the American Express card. When you travel, look for the sign of the world's largest lodging chain, Best Western, because when it comes to dependable lodging, you can count on them. For reservations, call 800-528-1234. Now here's a tip from another